The thing I'd like to talk about specifically today is consumption. I think it's actually appropriate that I'm following Matthew, and this could be seen as sort of a small ball response to asset urbanism. When we think about consumption, we typically think about things like fuel for energy for both that support both mobility and also raw resources that actually are consumed by us as we develop space. One of the things that we don't think about is the consequence of that consumption, or at least it's a lagging conversation. We're always going forward. We're not thinking about the trail of waste that falls behind us. One of the things that's sort of present in my mind as somebody who's actually converting materials into form as my project is that we're on the verge of another form of mass extinction, and that's the mass extinction of raw resources. This chart, thank you Chris and Nigel for providing me with this. This chart begins to talk about how much time we have left in terms of silver, gold, other materials that are more mundane that we use in our production. The dark lines are actually more alarming. They speculate on how much more quickly we will consume goods if the rest of the planet behaves and consumes goods at half the rate of North America. So with the United States and Canada sort of setting the pace for consumption, the upshot here is that we're in trouble. Part of the problem that we have is that we tend to view the world in view of a hierarchy. We have top-down consumption. We have high-order consumers that are big fish. We have lower-order consumers, scavengers that really do sort of provide a critical role in the chain of consumption that are classified as little fish. And I think that this model is fundamentally flawed as we move forward and we start thinking about even bigger populations and also an increasing resource scarcity. So I'm the child of a biologist, and one of the first things I learned is that there is actually no king of the jungle. There's no top order consumer. There's just a role player, that we behave in a system of niches and not in one of top-down consumption. The problem is that despite this truth, we tend to portray ourselves in this manner, and our consumption is sort of tethered to ego and hierarchy. So this is not a king or a lion. This is maybe closer to a chupacabra or something that we should put down as opposed to something that we should celebrate. The point being is no matter how carefully we plan our communities or simulate them, our cities aren't ecosystems or aren't habitats. They're ecosystems. They're messy, and they have to be bottom up. They have to be adaptable, responsive, and situated. There has to be room for flexibility within our city planning, is my argument. Which takes me to the favela. I'm very interested in the favela, but maybe less so as an urban typology for its form, but more about the way it positions itself opportunistically within the city fabric. It's considered an informal city type versus the city type here. We see Rio de Janeiro, Copacabana, and the favela up top. There are aspects of it that we are interested in as urbanists and designers. We notice that it has a self-generating type of scale. It's mixed use, it has walkable streets, things like that. But again, I'm interested in it because it is bottom up, it's adaptable, it's responsive, and it's situated. And it offers an alternative or a niche player for city making that I think we exclude. A kind of sloppiness and a kind of generative power that the favela has is something we should be focusing on more. When I was able to be in one of the favelas in 2010 and work with the community there, one of the things that's really interesting about it is the way that it's produced at a small scale. It's generational, so the scale of production is calibrated to use and need, not necessarily fixed to a speculative sort of investment property. First generation builds the base level, and you can read this actually in the architectural forum. A second generation 20 years later might build a second level because there's a need for the use of that space. Clearly this is defined by constraint of resources. Somebody earlier said the inconvenience of living in poor soil. I think that's an interesting way to think about it. But it is a responsive and calibrated system, which I think is important. The other thing I think is really interesting about it is the consumer is the producer. That's fundamentally different than our market strategy at the moment, and something that I think will be more and more relevant as we move forward. So I'm going to jump scale really quickly and sort of move into a realm that I'm thinking about. I'm going to talk about Barcelona and concede completely that it is an economic powerhouse. It's a major EU city. It's a first world city. But it's interesting for a couple of reasons. One of them is what these two gentlemen have started to talk about. Vincent Guillard on the left is a city architect, something Vancouver should take note of. Anthony Vives on the right is the vice mayor and also the head of planning. They did something radical in that they classified the city of Barcelona and cities in general as product-to-trash conversion devices, which is interesting because they're basically framing the city in terms of consumption and waste and not in value and opportunism. So one of the things that they did as a strategy is they proposed a network, they call it Fab City, Fab for fabrication, an interconnected network of situated production labs within the city. They saw this as a humanist move in that they would provide education, support, and access to the community in general, and try to locate and situate consumption and production in situ. So connecting waste streams, recycling into production and fabrication, and letting the local individual make decisions about what they consume, when they consume it, and how they consume it. So I think that that's a really intriguing thing as we move forward. The other thing they did is they connected this idea to a broad network. So instead of thinking about just localism, these networks are part of the MIT Digital Fabrication Network, so they have access to all the new technology and the new thinking on how they might produce and consume. So if something breaks, you actually make your own part and replace it. You don't go out, throw your iPhone, iPad, computer away and buy a new one. I think really critical as we move forward that we begin to calibrate and do these types of moves in our new cities. And so basically we become niche players. We have a responsive system that consumption does not necessarily equal success, but that the consumer is the producer and we have the ability to make mass customizable and sustainable urban areas in the future. And I ended ahead of schedule.